Welcome to another episode of CrossTalk. My name is Kevin Tocci, and we are here for the next 30 minutes. We use this particular program as a vehicle to be able to better inform and educate the viewers of the two communities that we serve, Whitman and Hanson, and sometimes this program goes above and beyond that to other community access centers around the Commonwealth. So we thank you for tuning into this program. It is the political season here in 2018, and we plan to have a variety of candidates. We've already showcased a few. We have more. Joining us is a gentleman who is looking for your vote on, I believe, September 4th for the big primary. He is a candidate for U.S. Senate. We have Mr. John Kingston here in studio. Mr. Kingston.
Kevin, it's great to be here. Thanks so much.
Welcome, and thank you very much for coming to little old Whitman and sitting down and chatting with us. For folks who don't know you or folks who are getting to know you, give us a little bit of a background, a bio on yourself.
Terrific. Well, I come from a small town, small enough town that it makes current Whitman look like a big town. And I come from a very rural, working class background. My dad was a military veteran that when he left the Army, he became a public school teacher. My mom stayed at home with us. And, so we grew up with modest means. My parents struggled to get by for us, but from there, I went from that small town off to big fancy Ivy League schools on lots of loans and that sort of thing. It was not something that people did in my generation from my small town, but it seemed like the path for me. And I've had the pleasure, the privilege, the honor. Of experiencing the American dream in this country, of being able to, come from small town, modest means, hardworking parents who gave me love of God, love of country, love of neighbor as yourself as anchoring principles and said, you can do anything in this country. I believed it, and what a thrill to be all these years later after having gone to law school, practiced a little bit, been out in industry. I was in business for a long time. To now have a chance to serve the country in this capacity, it's so thrilling. It's so such an honor to do that.
Talk to us about any political background you have, whether it's running for previous office, maybe you're somebody who's worked on various campaigns as an advisor.
No, it's great. It's a great question. I think the right way to think about me is as a guy that's been in the business world for a long time, and I'm a classic businessman outsider to Washington. I have taken my problem-solving orientation. I'm sort of a serial social entrepreneur. I've set up over time a lot of different programs, projects myself, kicked off different initiatives, since my college years and my law school years, to solve, what are American problems, areas like taking care of our veterans and families, providing educational opportunities for those that are left behind, ladders of success for those in the inner city, creating modes to for families to teach virtue to they're young, help turn them into the best young Americans we can have. Advancing the culture of freedom of speech on campus is something I've been working on for 30 some odd years now. So along the way I've been solving problems in the private sector and business, and then in the sort of civic sector by saying, hey, there's a problem over here. Let's try to put our best minds together with people up and down the racial, ethnic, political, ideological spectrum. So always reaching across divides to bring people together to try to solve whatever these American problems are. I'm going to stay with that theme for just a minute, Kevin, and just say, it's being evidenced even this year. My wife is spearheading an initiative we call Uniting America, which is run through our foundation with my wife. And so basically the project is to look at what are not Republican problems, not Democratic problems, but American problems. The opioid crisis, the problem of giving good educations to everybody, those who are stuck in failing school districts, foster care and the adoption system, some of the deep problems there, taking care of veterans and our families, taking care of the needs of our first responders, civility in public life. So even this year, my wife is working on that path, to sort of say, hey, these are the nonpartisan, American issues. So that's what I've been doing my life, is to try to solve problems as I see them, lean into them, apply my money, resources, capital, bring people to together to try to solve them. In terms of the political world, I've done a lot of things on the Republican side over the years, and but always behind the scenes. I've always been a behind the scenes guy, and Gets me to the question, I guess, which probably is the natural one. Well, why the heck am I doing this now? Probably your next question.
Well, it sounds to me like you already kind of described the foundation of why you want to get involved with all your know-how and your ability as far as being a business person, that you want to somehow kind of help our country thrive in certain areas when it comes to business, the economy, jobs, things like that. That again, the foundation that you'll build up from.
All the words you just shared were spot on, but I think it's even a little bit more fundamental than that for me. I along with Americans generally are heartbroken and dispirited by the state of affairs in Washington right now in our leadership, and I think that what we see now in this era is as bad as we've seen it in our lifetimes, but just brokenness in Washington, division, dysfunction. And Elizabeth Warren is symbolic of that, emblematic of that. She's the most, the greatest divider in chief in the Senate and the most divisive figure in the entire country on the ballot this year. So I said, look, why don't we try to strike a blow for bringing Americans together? The age of division, which Elizabeth Warren represents, should be past us. Let's go for an era of unity, and that's why I'm running in this race.
Talk to me about the economy as it sits right now and the need for further job creation down the road.
Yeah. Well, the anchoring principles of my campaign it would be one, let's come together to solve quintessentially American problems. Two, let's stand against division, bringing people together across divides. But three, it's to remember the basic American project here: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Right? I mean, that's what Thomas Jefferson wrote about.
Indeed.
At the outset. And part of the pursuit of happiness is what we find in communities like Whitman. Right? Taking care of your family, being committed to your neighbors, a quintessential American fabric there. But part of that is dignified work, right? Is having work that you get up in the morning, you're contributing to the world. We all ought to have that purpose. So of course job creation is always part of the American story. Now, it happens to be the case, and you and I talked about it off camera a minute ago, that right now the economy happens to be white hot. And there are more jobs posted right now in the country and in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts than people willing to work. That's a great high-class problem to have, and that's fantastic. But what we also know, Kevin, you and I, is that some people structurally have been left behind in all of this. And what we need to be about, what leaders need to be about, is trying to figure out how to give those folks the opportunity, the purpose, the sense that they can be part of this thing and get them back in the workforce. Because as Americans, we need them. We need everybody. And we need everybody to pull their own weight, be in the workforce. When a guy's not in the workforce, a woman's not in the workforce that's capable, it wants, could be, would be, should be, it's a loss for that person. It's a loss for their family. It's a loss for their local community. It's a loss for all of us, because those are great, human assets, people that can really contribute. And that's part of my mission.
If I could throw the dynamic of our off-camera conversation, and it's the dynamics of economics, and anybody who understands economics, it's cyclical, and there's an up and a down, and it's just it's a matter of how the swing of how high or how low we are during the cyclical motion. What can we do to make sure that the up and down is somewhat a smaller bell curve than if it was, you know what I mean? Because we've seen throughout our history where we've seen some, whether it's through the Depression where things are up or down, and when they're down, they're down.
Yeah, so those are great macro questions to be wrestling with, and on some level, they're probably beyond both of our pay grades, because they're bigger than all of us on some level, right? There's only so much that even great American leadership can do to guide us through those things. But we have learned some lessons about that, and I believe that when things are as hot as they are right now, when unemployment's down in the threes, the lowest unemployment rate in nearly 40 years, when there are more job postings than jobs, when the economy is hitting on a lot of cylinders, we have to figure out how to, one, make hay while the sun shines, right?
Indeed.
It doesn't last forever. And then we have to figure out how to be sensibly setting aside stores for the time that it doesn't. So we shouldn't. There's a saying that goes something to the effect of trees don't grow to the sky, right? There's a limit to where how far certain things can grow before they trim back. We have to assume that in a handful of years, sooner rather than later, ultimately we're going to go through tough times, and we shouldn't be overspending now, believing that later it's just going to be just fine. We got to figure out how to manage some of these large scale issues like the debt and all of those things, which I think we have another issue that I'm really concerned about.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, and I think under the heading of the economy, we look at what's going on with the current administration and knowing that there's a conversation about fair trade and something that's equitable where, we are not somebody who's taking advantage in the global market.
Right.
How important is it that whoever our leadership is, whoever our folks are down in Washington, D.C., have cooler heads that prevail to be able to find a solution for us to compete in the market, but yet not get taken advantage of at the same time?
Great question and well said. I mean, I think the question almost presents the answer. Yes, we need cool heads. We need people that are dedicated to fair trade. It is the case that over time trade has made America and the world more prosperous. That said, it's also the case that in certain situations, particularly with some unsavory counterparties, in China's at the top of the list, we get the short end of the stick. And particularly certain pockets of American workers definitely get the short end of the stick. So we need to be dedicated to making sure that we're taking care of those folks that are not getting the right opportunities. That would be the essence of the fair trade concept. And we got to stop people that are cheating against us, stealing our intellectual property as the Chinese do. That is something which both the right and the left can completely agree on. Let's stop the cheating. Let's stop taking our property. That's something that's wrong.
And again, it's talking about economy and jobs, education. Yeah. That's a key. And I think that's something you may appreciate because I believe that you have educators in your family, right?
Sure, absolutely. My dad was an educator. My mom, after we left home, she went on to be a public school teacher as well. And actually, shout out to my mom. I was just with her, earlier today. I visited her, just jumped off the trail for a few minutes and saw her. My late father is no longer with us, but my wife was an educator. Yeah, I mean. It has been a hardwired into all the principles of prosperity in our country and every Western country throughout time. Education, is human formation, right? You make people better. And then when you make people better, they get to contribute more, and then they get to take more off the table themselves because they've contributed more. Happily, here in Massachusetts, we're at that top end of the curve. I was just with Governor Baker last evening at an event, and he was, reminding the audience that, Massachusetts, if it stood alone, would test, as high as any nation in the planet. Of course, we don't stand alone. But in America, we have some issues. In certain pockets of Massachusetts, we have issues. But we're doing a pretty good job here. But we have to stay focused on doing better and better and better. And what I'm really focused on is educational opportunities for those that have been left behind. People that are in failing school systems. We don't get to wait a generation to solve those problems. Those kids are being left behind now, and if they don't have the opportunity set, in the next years of their upbringing, or we figure out a way to remedy that after they're young adults and figure out a way to get them set up, then it's a tragedy for them. It's a tragedy for their families. It's a tragedy for their community. And again, it's a tragedy for all of us because we don't get the benefit of their contributions.
But we've had previous administrations who have come up with initiatives like No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top. Is there something that the federal government can do to stimulate better education in all 50 states? Yeah. Of course, depending on what happens in California, then we could end up seeing 52 states. But the idea is being able to make sure that we are able to give a quality education to one and all.
Now that is again a terrific question, because I think ultimately education is best left to people locally. I mean, I think the idea of an aspirational Washington is a good one for something like education, right? We should set, the leadership of the country should set, this is where the bar should be set. I don't mean that by law, but like conceptually, as Americans, use the bully pulpit to say, we should be these type of people, educating, and leaving nobody behind. But I think ultimately, I don't want the federal government to be figuring out, how education should be happening here in Whitman-Hanson, right? I want the people here, the parents here, the local communities, civic leaders to say, hey, I want well-trained young people. I want everybody leaning in. Local leadership on this matter is far better than Washington leadership.
Would that be the same answer that you give for healthcare? Because we talk about Massachusetts, leading the nation when it comes to education. Yeah. We also are the ones who also have led when it comes to affordable health care.
That's right.
You think of Romney Care, which eventually it could be the outline for Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. And now with the current administration, which has tried to do some work but hasn't necessarily been successful. Give me your thoughts on health care.
Well, I'm of two minds on this subject. If we're going to whiteboard this, Kevin, you're right. My instincts are that local is better than federal, right? Local decisions in Massachusetts or Whitman-Hanson, are better than ones made in Washington on the design and architecture of healthcare systems. That said, we all know that there are federal policies that are deeply influencing the choices that are being made in that regard, be it Obamacare, which is deeply flawed, as many have observed, in terms of not actually peeling back the cost of health care, which was its principal aspiration. We need to set up better incentives in Washington, a better structure in Washington through the tax code and otherwise, so that people locally are able to make better decisions about having the care for all that we think fitting. The ship has sailed on the subject of whether the federal government's going to get involved or not, because once the federal government made certain choices ages ago about advantaging the payment of health care by employers through the tax code, and it's a complicated question, complicated issue that I'm not sure all of your viewers will necessarily track, because it sounds arcane. It's deep into the tax code. I don't want to bore your viewers on the subject like that. But the bottom line is, the federal government has been involved in the design and architecture of healthcare by advantaging certain arrangements through the tax code for a very, very long time. We have to rethink all of that. We have to an intelligent rethinking of how we can actually design a healthcare system such that where the costs aren't ramping up, the challenges administratively aren't on the increase, but fundamentally, let me get to the quick on this, the final point of this, not to do what my opponent Elizabeth Warren would want to do, which is to take all of it and drive it to Washington, to have universal health care coverage. Can you imagine a regime in which you don't get to choose your doctor anymore, but the federal government gets to set up how you're choosing your doctor? Right. Washington is broken. Washington is not functioning in a way that any of us want for it to. I'm going to say to the voters of Massachusetts now and in the future, if you like what you're getting out of Washington, by all means send Elizabeth Warren back. She's perfect for it. But if you want something different, if you want something like the way we get things down here in Massachusetts with Charlie Baker working across the aisle, then send me to Washington. And on this point, right, is key point, and just sets up the distinction between me and my opponent in this race. Elizabeth Warren would want to take something like health care and drive it to that broken and divided Washington, that dysfunctional Washington, should want to take our health care system and drive it all there and make all the decisions driven through Washington. You and I, the voters of Massachusetts, don't want that. They want to be able to choose for themselves. They want to figure out what the best health care outcomes are. So we got to figure out how to get the federal government involved in this on a proportionate basis, and certainly not keep driving more and more and more to Washington.
You said it earlier on during our discussion that things are broken down in Washington.
Yeah.
broken so much that they've struggled to put together a budget on a regular basis. You have an initiative on your website: no budget, no pay.
Absolutely.
Describe it.
Hey, look, as I said before, I'm an outsider. I'm a businessman running to reform a broken Washington. And I'll say it time and again, if you like what you're getting out of Washington, send Elizabeth Warren back, because she's perfect for this era. Her anger, her division's perfect to keep Washington as broken as it is. My approach is to reform Washington fundamentally, first by term limits. Two terms and I'm out of there. I think that should be something which we should put our shoulder to get a constitutional amendment on that. I mean, we need to get the career politicians out of there. It is not serving our country. We need to circulate leadership through. One of the truest turns of phrase of President Trump was talking about the swamp and the swampiness. And I don't think it's been drained in the last couple of years. That's not my sense. So let's get serious about that and go back to citizen legislators that go to Washington, lead for a while, and go back home. Second point, though, is the one you brought up. People have not done their jobs. If you and I don't do our jobs, we don't get paid, right? No. And Harry Reid for 6 years didn't pass a budget for 6 years as majority leader. Elizabeth Warren votes to, along with the Schumer shutdown, to shut down the government because of the DACA folks that aren't even Americans. Now, I mean, we know these are real issues, but to shut down the government over it? Well, if you shut down the government or you don't pass a budget, then you shouldn't get paid. And if we formalize commitments like that say, hey, Washington, the American people are sick and tired of the way you're doing business, I think we get some real change out of it.
You mentioned DACA, and I see it as a nice segue to talk about immigration reform, and a lot of things that we're seeing in the news these days, or separating families. And it seems as though a lot of folks have forgotten that we are a nation of immigrants. But there also has to be some kind of way for someone to be here legally, not to be here where they're here illegally, and especially if somebody is a career criminal who is in our country from another country. Give me your thoughts on immigration and any reform that needs to take place.
Well, if there was an exhibit 1 on broken Washington right now, it's immigration. I've seen the polling. I've looked carefully at this nationwide and here in Massachusetts. 75% of the voters in Massachusetts want enhanced border security. That means they want us to be able to figure out who comes into our country and who doesn't. It's a simple premise. Everybody except for the far left believes that we should figure out what our borders are and who gets to come in. 75% of the American people also believe that if they're criminals and they're here illegally, that if the criminal element should be sent back home. That we no sanctuary cities, no sanctuary state. It's only, again, the far left that really thinks that open borders and let anybody in, it doesn't matter what they do, by any terms. And yet here we have a moment, where once again the breakdown of Washington's ability to rally together to get the most basic thing done. Almost everyone up and down the political spectrum, Democrats and Republicans, sensible people on both sides, believe in those two premises. Almost everybody also believes that law observing kids that are here as a result of decisions made a generation before. We should figure out a way to keep them here over time. No, we're not prescribing terms here about what that should be, but we just know that there's some way to keep them around that's reasonable, rational, and that the American people are in favor of. That polls at like 80%. So with all those things, which nearly everybody agrees with, here we have a situation where we're in this moment where American spirits are being torn down by looking at this, separation of families issue. And that's not bringing us to the spaces we want to be as Americans, right. Figuring out who we want to be as American people. We know we embrace immigrants. We know that, Kevin, you mentioned it. It's in our fiber, it's in our DNA. We know we can solve this better than the way we're currently solving it.
We got less than 5 minutes left, and there's still a couple of things. If there was a particular issue that you could kind of discuss for a few moments that I haven't mentioned, what would you want to talk about?
Well, look, I think I think the thing that I would like to keep on coming back to, because it's really what I'm doing in this campaign, is to say, broken Washington, divided Washington, leadership which is dragging our spirits down. My opponent, Senator Warren, who is also in that group of folks dragging our spirits down. I want to run the campaign of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, getting back to local communities, which get it done here in Whitman, on the ball fields of Whitman and the local businesses, the civic associations, the churches. People get it done, and people figure out over time. If they're not distracted by Washington and the lack of leadership of Washington, then they are focusing on their families. They are focusing on how to do their work in a dignified fashion, and get up every day and contribute to the world. And they are figuring out how to be committed to their neighbors and take care of their neighbors. And that's the country, and that's where happiness is to be found. And that's the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, approach that I want to keep on taking. I want this to be a contrast ultimately between the division and anger of Senator Warren and a happiness initiative of anchored in the dignity and the purpose of the American people closer to home that I wanted to be championing. That's what I'm about in this campaign.
If you wanted folks to find out more about the issues that that are at the heart of your campaign, any events that you might be attending in the local area, how can they find out more?
Terrific. JohnKingston.com is where to find out more about me. I'd love to invite your viewers to take a look. There's a lot more information. You'll see more about my unique biography, my story of how I came from next to nowhere and I've reached across divides all my days and are here in this race trying to bring a seemingly broken Washington leadership together. So that's why I'm in this thing, and I'd love to have your viewers take a look at JohnKingston.com.
I want to thank you very much for coming to Whitman Hanson Community Access and discussing your campaign. Of course, we wish you the best of luck out on the trail. And remember, it's up to you as a voter to get educated on the folks who are looking for your vote, whether it's in September for the primary or in November. Get informed, get educated on the issues, where the candidates stand. That's the only way that we can be able to fix a lot of the problems, whether it's here locally or down in Washington, D.C. You've been watching CrossTalk, and until next time, have yourself a great day.